Hello, folks. This is episode number 29 for the OsProgramadores podcast. And today we have Quincy Larson. Quincy was a school director for 6 years before he started to learn to code so that he could create tools for making schools more efficient. His own journey to learning to code was long and winding, and he recognized the need for a single track curriculum for newbie developers. And that led to the creation of Free Code Camp. Quincy, it's fantastic to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and experience with us. One question that I usually ask everybody at the beginning of the conversation here is, how was the beginning? But for you, it's a little bit different because you were teaching and a director for quite some time. If I understand correctly, you look into how you could automate some of the issues that your staff were having that eventually motivated you to create Free Code Camp. Can you speak to us about that time? How was it, and what led you to create Free Code Camp?
Absolutely. First, thank you very much for inviting me on the OsProgramadores podcast. I'm doing my best to try to pronounce that correctly with the Portuguese pronunciation. So, I was a school director and I ran schools in the United States and in China for about 10 years. Both as a teacher and as a school director. And one of the big things I did as a school director was I oversaw like immigration paperwork because we were an English as a second language school. People would come in from all over the world, including many people from Brazil. And we would have to deal with like government paperwork to get them their visas and update the government on their visa status. And also I was overseeing a whole lot of teachers, and those teachers had to do a lot of paperwork, whether that was grade reports, whether that was just, taking care of day-to-day paperwork. And then I had an administrative staff, and they were spending a lot of time at their desk doing things. And there was a lot of work that involved people not interacting with students, but at a desk on a computer, entering data and doing kind of rote things like that. And I thought, well, maybe we could free these teachers up so they could spend more time with students if we could figure out ways to automate some of this boring back office work. So that's what I started doing. I just started Googling around and learning a little bit about programming, Visual Basic, Excel, spreadsheet automation. I used a tool called AutoHotkey, which allowed me to kind of program my computer to click on things and type in certain sequences so that I could basically just start a script and walk away from my computer and come back and all the paperwork would be done. Things like that. So it was programming technically, but it was just very rudimentary. But it made a huge difference. And lots of teachers and students were able to spend more time together. Everybody was happier. A lot of people were trying to tell all their friends and their family, oh, you should come to the school. It's really great and it's really laid back. And I think a lot of that was due to me just taking a chance on learning to program, even though I was, 31-year-old office worker who didn't really know very much about technology. I often tell people that whenever we would move to a new house, I would actually ask my wife to set up the Wi-Fi router because I didn't have the patience to figure out how to do it. And that all changed when I became a developer, and I would spend, hours and hours, sometimes days, debugging some issue with like a Linux, environment variable, or trying to figure out like some performance bottleneck in my code. And a lot of it was just an attitude shift away from being impatient and thinking, oh, I'm not a programmer, to embracing that, nobody's really a programmer. A lot of people may have like a natural inclination to program, but everybody has to go through kind of the same process of setbacks and dealing with ambiguity and things like that to gradually build up their skills. So that's kind of how I got started programming. And after a while, I decided that I was, I could only imagine how many people would benefit from being able to learn to code, because I had just made a huge difference in my school, just one person learning a little bit of coding. So I wanted to learn how to code properly. And I just spent about 7 months going to hackathons every weekend and hanging out at hacker spaces and maker spaces and going to events at night at different companies, tech companies, and just learning everything I could about programming. I mean, it basically, I had saved up enough money that I could actually leave my job as a school director just so I could learn to code. And that was a big risk, but I was able to get a software engineer job after about 7 months. And that's when the real learning started once I got a job. And eventually I was like, okay, I want to help other people learn to code. So that I created a bunch of education technology tools that, of course, nobody cared about. And they didn't ever really get any serious adoption by anybody. And it took about 2 years of just creating projects and building code bases and then trying to get people to use the code. But eventually I built Free Code Camp and people started using that. And that's kind of how Free Code Camp got started.
That's a fantastic background there. So thank you. It's also incredible because it's complex, right? So it's not easy to just we don't wake up one day and you say I'm a programmer today. It's a journey, right? So there's a lot of learning. Like you said, you had to go through a lot of training and lots of I'm sure lots of nights and before you got to the level that you could get a software engineering job, and eventually you look into how you can help others as well, start creating your tool set. And you said it took 2 years, right? But then you got to a point that you're building some tools and you're not being able to get attention. Do you still remember the PR number one, and how did you start getting some attention from other people to join you in the effort to build the Free Code Camp and push that forward? Do you still remember that time? And what happened there? How did you spend those 2 years? You built a whole bunch of tools, and what did you do to get more attention and more help to move Free Code Camp forward?
Right. That's a great question. So I had a fairly complicated tool that had like a course recommendation engine built in, and it would take a whole bunch of personal data from like LinkedIn and use that to make decisions about what you should learn in what sequence, depending on what job you were working currently and what job you wanted to work. So if you, let's say you were like a business intelligence developer or something like that, and you had some basic skills, it would figure out, okay, if you want to become like a full stack, software engineer, like what additional skills would you need to learn? And then it would recommend courses to do that. And that was just too complicated for a lot of people. People just didn't seem to understand the value in that. And so the big breakthrough was when I took everything else away. I took away all the fancy stuff and I just said, hey, this is a site where you can learn JavaScript and you can chat with other people while you're learning JavaScript. It was just very simple. And then that got some interest and people would like come and hang out. But what really happened was I wrote about my own personal coding journey and a lot of the insights that I had built into Free Code Camp as far as the curriculum. Like it was just one linear curriculum. There weren't a bunch of electives. There was no ambiguity. You start at the beginning and you go to the end. And then you have a pretty good grasp on JavaScript development. And because it was so focused, that made it a lot easier for people to understand what it was. And so I wrote that article and I published it, and then somebody submitted it to like Hacker News and somebody submitted it to Reddit, and it just kind of got really popular. And then like Business Insider wrote an article about me. And so kind of all at once in the span of like a day, Free Code Camp went from being a project that maybe only a few hundred people had heard of to being something that had 20,000 users. So that was just a lucky break. And I always tell people, it's better to be lucky than good. and I know plenty of people who are much better developers than I am. I know plenty of people who are probably much better at designing a project and executing on that, and definitely people that are better writers than I am. But to some extent, like I just kept trying, and eventually I got lucky. And maybe a lot of people would have to try a lot longer before they got lucky, like I did. But I happened to get lucky only about 2 years in.
It's incredible to see the growth going to 20,000 users at some point in time, and that fast, based on the the attention you got from those Reddit and some of the others you mentioned. How many users do you have today? If I look at Free Code Camp, I'm assuming it's your way above 20,000 people in your multiple countries as well, right? So I think you have a presence in China. You have Free Code Camp. Yes, I think there's some work going on in Spanish as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on? Where's
Sure.
Free Code Camp being used right now, and what's the coverage from a country perspective and language perspective as well?
Yeah, we have about 500,000 people who use Free Code Camp every day. So that's mostly people just reading articles on our publication. And, some percentage of those people are actually going into the curriculum and making progress through the interactive coding challenges and the lessons and building projects. But that's the number that I really care about, not the total number of registered users, because, like Pinterest has a lot of registered users, but I don't know how many people actually go in and actively work on Pinterest every day. But I'm very proud of that 500,000 number, because it took us 6 years to get to that point where we had that many people using Free Code Camp every day. And it's not just like the quantity of people, but it's like how serious people are. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is just the number of people that are on the forum helping one another, asking questions, and how quickly you can get an answer if you ask a question on the forum. And I feel like before we used Medium, we used like different tools that kind of accelerated our growth, but we've been able to move almost all of that onto our own platform and do self-hosted tools. And it's a lot harder when you don't have like a giant recommendation engine like Medium boosting you. And it was really painful to kind of go from like tons of readers on Medium to significantly less just on our own private publication. But we've kind of caught up and surpassed where we were. So it was just kind of a disciplined decision to wean ourselves off of these big platforms and to focus on building things that we ourselves as a community can control.
And I think you also have, besides the programming aspect or the training aspect of Free Code Camp, you also have a supporting forum, which is fantastic. And I think you also have a news component where there's different articles being written all the time, correct?
Yes, we publish articles almost every day. Usually Monday through Friday is when we publish most of the articles. But we publish articles and we're very proud of the quality. It's not just kind of like, oh, I'm doing this coding challenge and here's my results or something like that. It's like every single article is carefully edited, and we're proud of everything we publish. So we've definitely taken the approach of quality over quantity. And with the forum, of course, anybody can get help from anybody. And we have a very, very strict code of conduct. And we have to ban a lot of people, but the result is it's a very friendly environment to ask programming questions where you don't have to worry about people being rude to you very often. Usually people are generally supportive.
And you mentioned that you have 500,000 users on a daily basis. How many countries are you covering now, and mainly, and how many languages? I think you have English right now. I think you have Spanish, if I'm not mistaken, and Chinese as well. Correct? Any other languages or any other plans for other languages as well?
Yeah, so it's just English, Spanish, and Chinese right now, but we're going to launch some other languages. The languages we want to prioritize the most are Arabic and Russian, and of course Brazilian Portuguese. So those are the other three big languages that we're going to hopefully have within the next year or so. It's just there's a lot of work. It's not just translating. We could just drop in like a translation widget or some like localization tool, and the translation would be okay, but they wouldn't be great. We really want to have all the translation work done by volunteer contributors who are native speakers to make it as good as possible. And we also want to launch like Twitter accounts for these languages and YouTube channels and other publications that have editors, and so there's a lot of work in doing localization right. So we're doing it slowly. I think Quora.com is a very well run website, and it took them years after they started before they even added Spanish as a language. And I think now they've added quite a few languages, but they took a very slow, deliberate approach, and we want to do the same.
We have lots of listeners in Brazil that could likely help with bring Free Code Camp to Brazil, to Brazilian Portuguese, and there's a 200 million plus population in Brazil, and a good chunk of that I'm sure would be very interesting in being able to use what you guys offer on Free Code Camp. Can you, if our listeners are interested in helping Free Code Camp somehow, can you tell them what do they need to do to help with the localization effort for Brazilian Portuguese? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. We do have, if you go to contribute.freecodecamp.org, there's like an entire kind of document that walks you through how to get involved. And you can also just hang out on Twitter. You can always DM me on Twitter and say, "Hey, I'm an engineer in this field, or I work at this company, or I'm just interested in translating. Like I've worked as a translator before." And you can send me some information. We're using a pretty cool tool called Crowdin to do all the localization, and it's just if you go to translate.freecodecamp.org, you can see the system and potentially just sign in and start translating things into Brazilian Portuguese. Now, the big goal is to actually have the full curriculum in there and to publish it and quality, do quality assurance and everything. So it may be a while before your contributions are actually publicly visible, but we would welcome your help if you want to go ahead and start doing that. Again, we want to make sure that Chinese and Spanish get off to a good start first and then learn what we can from that process so that we can turn around and apply it when we start the Brazilian Portuguese publication and all the other things that we're going to do.
You mentioned JavaScript, but I think just recently you guys introduced the Python data science as well, correct?
Yes, and Python is going to actually be a much bigger part of our curriculum than JavaScript will be soon. We're getting ready to launch, and this hasn't been published yet when I'm talking to you, but I think by the time this goes live, maybe this will be public. Maybe this isn't public information yet, but we are launching a full-blown data science curriculum that's going to teach all the math you would learn in university, and then some advanced math like linear algebra and advanced statistical approaches that you would use with machine learning. So it's going to be very heavily Python based, and we're getting ready to add more than 10 new certifications to the Free Code Camp curriculum just focused on Python ecosystem tools.
That's fantastic news, and thank you for sharing that with us here. I suspect that your user base is going to be growing very quickly, way above the 500,000 per day if introducing full, complete data science kind of courses. That's very exciting to hear that. And with that in mind, and putting a little bit of my infrastructure hat in, can you tell us a little bit how is the Free Code Camp operation? How does your infrastructure looks like? You talk about cloud, AWS, Azure. I think you mentioned in one interview they're using DigitalOcean. Not sure if it's still the case. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, and also the people that I think you have a group of core volunteers or employees that work with you to push that forward. Would you be able to speak a little bit about the infrastructure and also that group of individuals that form the core Free Code Camp team?
Absolutely. So for infrastructure, we're on the cloud. We use AWS, we use Azure, we use Google Cloud Platform, Compute Platform (GCP), and we use DigitalOcean for some servers for some different tasks. We use mostly traditional servers like Linux servers. We don't use a whole lot of like AWS Lambda serverless stuff, but we use a little bit of it. And the actual code bases involved for Free Code Camp, it's just a giant Node.js app. We use like a tool called Loopback, which is kind of like Express. It's very similar to Express, but it just has some more powerful API capabilities built in. And then we use React on the client side, and most of our web apps use React. We also have a project called DevDocs, which is written in Ruby, and that is hosted almost completely client side. We have a few APIs, but it's basically like a client side app. And DevDocs is where you can get documentation on most major open source projects in a nice, clean search engine type environment. And that project's actually older than Free Code Camp is, but it was given to us by the creator of DevDocs, who wanted a good nonprofit open source community to help continue to shepherd projects. So we've been working on that for a couple years and just continuing to expand the documentation and improve the app. And then we just have a whole lot of random like services and APIs and things, CDNs that we use. So yeah, we use all kinds of different stuff. We're very pragmatic. We just use whatever tool we think will work the best. And almost all of us are primarily JavaScript and Python developers. So most of the new projects we start use either the JavaScript ecosystem or the Python ecosystem.
That's fantastic. And can you speak a little bit about the core group that help you move Free Code Camp forward?
Absolutely. So we are a pretty small team. Most of the work is actually done by volunteer contributors within the community, but we do, as Free Code Camp grew, I had the resources to bring on a few contributors to help full time. And so what I do is generally I look at who's contributing the most to Free Code Camp, and then I approach them and I say, hey, you're doing great. Like, if I was to just let you work on Free Code Camp full time and pay you, do you think you could do even more work? And in some cases, people are able to do that. In many cases, people are already working like a really good job at that pays way more than Free Code Camp can afford to pay anyway, and they can just continue as a volunteer contributor. But in cases where people are interested in doing it, maybe they don't work full time, maybe they're just a university student, or maybe they're in between jobs. A lot of times it makes sense for them to join the team. So we have currently, including myself, we have 12 people working full time on Free Code Camp around the world. Many of them are here in the US, and we also have people in Asia and Europe. And then we have other people who work for Free Code Camp in like a part-time capacity in Africa. Actually, I don't know if we have anyone in Latin America yet who's actually working on Free Code Camp, but we have a tremendous number of volunteers. So that's definitely something we want to do in the future is get more of a foothold in terms of having more community members in Latin America.
Yeah, I did one PR, Quincy. It was approved.
Well, thank you for your contribution.
One PR, so I can put on in a little frame and put on my wall here. Just going back and thinking about those days when you're learning, right? So and you didn't have something like Free Code Camp available to you. How was it? How hard was it to learn to do the programming? Because at that point in time, you did some work there with Visual Basic to help do some of the automation work, but and then you said, I want to do this. It's interesting. I want to learn how to program. And what did you do to get to the point that you became proficient to allow you to get into a software engineer kind of job?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it was a very long, kind of ambiguous, lonely process learning to code. I didn't, my undergraduate degree doesn't have anything to do with programming. I have like an English degree, essentially. I worked in journalism, and then I worked as a teacher. And I didn't really have very much experience using computers to create things, only to consume things. Like Microsoft Office, and then just getting basic things done with a computer, like booking plane tickets and stuff like that. So I had to really start from the beginning and understand, okay, like, how do computers work? Like, what can I do to get these computers to get things done for me? And that's one benefit, because I'd already been a manager and had this very pragmatic mindset. I wasn't like, oh, this is some hot new technology that I should chase. Like, I wasn't like, oh, Elixir, I really need to learn Elixir, or, oh, I really need to learn Golang or something like that. I was just like, okay, what tool can get the job done? So I had that pragmatic mindset. And so I started learning Python, and I just, I went through Project Euler, which is a kind of a math and computer science focused challenge website. And I would just basically try to do as many Project Euler problems as I could in Python. And I would constantly have to be looking things up on Wikipedia, like mathematical concepts and referencing things. But I managed to get fairly far. That process of just spending all day, like basically racking my brain, trying to think like, okay, how do I solve this? There were definitely parts where I was just like, oh, my brain's not ready for this. Or I just can't do this. Like, and I felt really, really dumb, but I just persisted. And I think a lot of people go through that same process, but they don't necessarily have the self-confidence to keep pushing forward. And so they give up. Another thing that was very important for me was that I surrounded myself with successful developers. I lived in California at the time, and there were a lot of people that I knew that just from like hanging around in the city that were working as software developers. And so I could talk to them, and I could just try to relate to them and try to understand what they were interested in. And it felt like I felt like an imposter, but gradually I was able to get them to accept me as one of their own, so to speak. And it took a long time to impress them and ultimately gain their trust and convince them that it was worth spending 5 minutes helping me debug this issue on my computer. So it was kind of a lonely process, but I did everything I could to meet other people and to stay motivated. I often tell people, any sufficiently motivated person can learn to code, but it's hard to stay sufficiently motivated. It's hard to stay sufficiently confident in your skills. The process of programming is very ambiguous, and it's unforgiving in the sense that if you make a mistake while you're playing a piece of music, you can just keep playing. Or if you make a mistake when you're learning a new language, maybe the person who you're talking with will just ignore it and you'll be able to keep going. With a computer, if you make a mistake, you're going to get an error message. And often the error message is, very unforgiving and very cold. And you have to figure out what that error message means. And, all day long, every day, you're basically being told you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong by the computers. And you have to be able to be tough mentally to be able to accept, okay, this computer is just doing what I tell it. It's my fault that this computer is not working properly. I just need to figure out how I can make this computer happy and communicate what I need to this computer. So I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges with learning to code is just figuring out a way to understand computers and to really understand what they need to be able to get their job done so that they can do the work that you're trying to get them to do.
I think the recommendation of keeping don't worry about learning 10 million languages at the same time and try to learn something that gets the job done and get yourself motivated. It's a great recommendation, right? So we usually see in the group there's a whole bunch of young people, young adults trying to get into programming. It's like you said, it's hard. It's not easy. And down in Brazil, several people don't speak English yet, and hopefully we can motivate them to learn English with these English interviews we're recording for the podcast. But at the same time, it's hard, right? So but a lot of people are trying. It's exciting to see that they're learning. It's also exciting to see that eventually Free Code Camp is going to be available in Portuguese as well. So we look forward to seeing that happening sometime soon. And then I look at the Free Code Camp. It's a massive exercise. It's helping so many people to get the job done and to learn, right? My understanding is everything in the site is free. There's no membership. There's no fee that anybody has to pay. How do you guys get your operation funded? So, because my understanding, I think you sell some merchandise. Is it the way you're doing, or how can you guys keep the show going? Let's put it this way.
Yeah, there are really two major ways that we are able to keep Free Code Camp running. And of course, everything is completely free and it will always be free. I put the word free right at the beginning of the name of Free Code Camp because I wanted to emphasize that being free is like the biggest thing about Free Code Camp. Like there are lots of places you can learn about, data structures and algorithms and learn JavaScript and learn Python and things like that. But Free Code Camp is truly free in the sense that it's not like some shareware version where you have to pay to get the rest of it. The goal really is to make it accessible to everyone. The way we sustain the organization is we have a lot of very, very nice people around the world, including many Brazilians who donate to Free Code Camp each month. And it's $5 US. We have about 7,000 people who donate that each month. And that's enough for us to be able to pay for servers and to pay for some people to be able to work on Free Code Camp full time. The other way that we fund Free Code Camp is we apply for lots of grants. And in the US, there are grants that you can get not just from, we haven't gotten any big government grants, but we've gotten grants from like private companies. Like Google has given us a couple grants to create courses around TensorFlow, for example. So that is the main way that we sustain Free Code Camp, is just as a nonprofit, donations and grants.
So if those are listening to us, they can contribute to Free Code Camp by doing programming or translation. They can also contribute with donations as well, like you mentioned, $5 a month. That helps Free Code Camp to help quite a few people all over the world. So we spoke about the languages as well. And I remember you saying in one interview there is a pretty big presence in China. And I think you lived in China, you worked in China for some time as well. And it's something, China is so far away from Brazil. I was hoping that you could mention to us a little bit of how is free code can be used in China, and how is the growth being there, and how is the overall job market over there for computer programmers.
Yeah, China is a very dynamic, fast-moving place. In many ways, they're trying to make up for lost time. If you've studied the history of China, there's been a lot of heartbreak over the past 100 years. I think China is really, they are a very pro-technology society. In many ways, like, for example, in the US, people are maybe a little less trusting of technology. But in China, it's people are very enthusiastic about it, and there's no stigma about learning to code. You know, in the US, for example, growing up, it was kind of nerdy to spend all day on a computer, but in China, that's like totally normal. So, and also China doesn't have the same kind of like, because everything is newer there, and most of the kind of entrenched culture of like universities and like, oh, you've got to get a computer science degree to get this job and all that. Like in China, it's much easier to get a job as a developer without a computer science degree, or like you just walk in and you demonstrate your proficiency. And I think and it depends company to company. Certainly for the government, like they're much more traditional in the sense that they require certain degrees. But I would go to like Shanghai and I'd walk into an office where half of the people there had studied, Free Code Camp, for example, and were Free Code Camp alumni. It was pretty common for people to be using programming resources like Free Code Camp to expand their skills. And in many cases, it was the primary way that they had learned to program. Another thing is, depending on the university, a lot of the universities in China might be teaching very older technology like C++ and stuff primarily. So people needed to learn Python, they needed to learn JavaScript, and Free Code Camp was a good way to learn those contemporary skills. But as far as how China works, like just like every country, people locally just started creating study groups before the global pandemic happened. Of course, now it's harder to meet in person. And I don't recommend meeting in person at all right now. But once the vaccine is widely distributed, we'll be able to go back to having study groups. And people would just meet in cafes. They would meet in libraries, and some people would open up their offices after the workday and they'd have events there. People would just get together and code. And that happens, all over the world. But in China, especially, people would like get on planes and fly and hang out together in cities and like plan bigger Free Code Camp type events. And they go to conferences together and things like that. So they even created their own like version of Free Code Camp that was in Chinese fairly early on. And that is one of the ways that a lot of non-English speaking people were able to learn to code there. And now, of course, we've got the official Chinese version that is up. So people are using that. But I think China, it's a combination of an enthusiasm for technology. And one of the other things that is worth noting about China is they don't have the best education system in the world. I mean, South Korea, Norway, there are a lot of countries that are much better at teaching than China, but China is very good at making sure everybody has at least a baseline level of mathematics. And people spend a tremendous amount of time in mathematics, and most people do learn some programming and computer science in high school. So it's been a bigger priority there. So as a result, it was a very kind of fertile ground for something like Free Code Camp to take hold and really start helping a lot of people come together and program together.
It's very exciting to see that happening, right? And education is such an incredible, important tool, right? And talk a little bit about that. So you're a teacher and director for a few years, and what do you feel that can be done at a basic education, the regular schools, to help bring kids into technology and programming eventually? What do you think it's missing from the overall, perhaps North Canada and the US, very similar kind of from an educational system perspective here. What do you think can be done to improve and make it easier for kids to go into technology? Because right now kids are getting into technology when the mobile apps, Snapchat, whatever. But how can schools help them with the tools they need to have and to eventually be able to make a living doing programming and other or working other segments of technology?
So this is some place where I don't really have a, a well informed opinion because Free Code Camp is aimed almost exclusively at working adults trying to change careers, and we've always had that focus. Like we're not going to go into kids education. Like that's just not who we are. We don't have any expertise in that. But I will say that I think it's very important that we get kids not to just use mobile devices that are primarily around consuming, but that we get people onto laptops where they have full, Linux environments and can basically build applications. I think there are some good mobile apps to learn to code. For example, Solo Learn and Grasshopper app, but it's kind of just a shadow of real coding. If you want to really, build a production app, like you're going to need to learn how to use VS Code. You're going to need to learn how to, use cloud servers. You're going to need to learn all of those things. So, my kids, I do have two children. I'm not expecting them to learn to program in school. I don't know if schools will get around to doing that, even though I live in a pretty good public school district in a fairly wealthy part of Dallas, Texas, which is not like the wealthiest city in the United States. It's very much a middle class neighborhood and middle class school. But I think that hopefully in the future, every school in the United States, at least, will be able to have some programming classes. But again, like I'm probably not going to be a part of that movement because there are already, there's Khan Academy, there's Code.org, there's Hack Club and Girls Who Code, and a lot of these other organizations that are already kind of taking the lead on that. So we'll probably just stand back and help adult learners. I mean, if you think about it, most people are adults. There are a lot more adults than there are kids. And almost all of the resources in education go into helping kids. So we wanted to focus on helping adults who may still have, 50, 60 years left to live and could work very productively and expand their skills and apply those skills and be able to provide for their families in the process. I've always felt that adults are underserved. So that's what I've chosen to focus my career on, is helping adults.
Yeah, and if you go into the Free Code Camp website, there's a few stories of people that have gone through the Free Code Camp career and have been able to work for companies like Spotify and some other big software development companies, right? Just wonder if you could mention a couple of those examples of people that have been successful in completing the curriculum and then transitioning to a job with the technology industry. Would you be able to mention a couple of examples for us?
Yeah, well, rather than focus on anecdotes, there are a lot of anecdotes. You can go to, on LinkedIn, you can go to like Free Code Camp Alumni Network, and you'll see that there are tens of thousands of people who are now working at pretty much every big software company, Google, Apple, Microsoft, that have gone through Free Code Camp. We estimate that there are more than 40,000 people, probably a lot more than 40,000 people, but that I just use the figure 40,000 conservatively because I know with confidence that there are at least 40,000 people out there who've put on their LinkedIn that they've gotten a job as a developer. And before they got a job as a developer, they were working in some other field, like driving a truck or working in construction or working in a hospital or a hotel or something. Right. So, off the top of my head, stories of people who are getting good jobs, I could just open up a section on the forum and take a look. But we have an entire section called career advice, and people often post their success stories there. So if you scroll through that, you'll see that there are people who have been able to do that. 33-year-old with no web development experience now working as a full stack developer in 4 months thanks to FreeCodeCamp. That's one of the threads I just opened up. Just opening up the forum. And this person was from Europe. So there are so many cases like this. I don't want to single any single individual out just because I'm not sure if it would be representative. Instead, I would encourage everybody to just go check out the forum and the career section. And eventually, like I said, we'd love to launch a Portuguese forum. Or most likely what we'll do is we'll add Portuguese to this forum. We just want to make sure that when we launch it, that we have a sufficient critical mass of people who are interested in participating so it doesn't look like a ghost town.
Yeah, it's 40,000 people. It's pretty substantial. And it's helping a lot of people, right? So you also have the podcast where you guys speak about the stories of many of those people that have been able to get help through the FreeCodeCamp curriculum and be able to evolve their careers and work for technology companies as computer programmers as well. And Quincy, when you look back and you think of what you have been able to build, and you think about all the people that you have been able to help, and you continue to help, and you're going to continue to help, what crosses your mind? What comes to your mind in terms of looking back and thinking, holy cow, this is cool, this is great, right? So what crosses your mind?
Well, I'll be completely candid. I don't really look back that much. I just stopped even keeping a journal. I just focus on the future. And I mean, abstractly, I understand that, yes, FreeCodeCamp has managed to help a lot of people, and that does make me feel good. But I try not to focus on that and rather focus on, okay, how can we help even more people? There's a lot of poverty in this world. About 66% of people on Earth live off less than $10 US a day. And for $10 US a day, that's not even close to the threshold at which people start to kind of lose their marginal happiness when you give more money. Like a bunch of economists have estimated that once somebody's making about $80,000 US a year, they are basically about as happy as they're going to be. And how can we get more people up to that level? That's what I'm focused on. And of course, there are lots of inefficient systems. Governments that are using really outdated old systems, those could be updated. There's so much inefficiency. How can we get to self-driving cars faster so that there are fewer road accidents and fewer people die? How can we get to where every government has data scientists and people that are capable of modeling virus spreading, epidemiologists? How can we improve the quality of and the caliber of our professionals in all these different spaces? And I think a lot of it comes back to just education. And I'm just FreeCodeCamp is just a small part of that. But if we can make it easier for people to get technology education, I think we can have this big positive long-term effect. And in my mind, it's just about reducing human misery. That's what it's all about. That's what I wake up every day and I think about, how can we reduce the amount of human misery? Because misery is so much more intense than happiness, right? There's a saying that a person whose belly is full has 1,000 problems. A person who's hungry has only one. And how can we make sure that we can solve these problems? Because most of them just come back to information technology. Why there's more than enough food for everybody to eat, but we're very inefficient at allocating it and distributing it. Why are so many people spending so much time in jail waiting to get a trial? Well, a lot of it is because our legal systems are extremely inefficient or overloaded. How can we figure out how to expedite that so people spend less time in jail waiting for a proper trial? How can we figure out ways that money can be distributed more evenly and efficiently, rather than just having a few people who get lucky become billionaires and everybody else struggling to pay their rent? A lot of that comes down to just better information technology. and ultimately more educated people that make better decisions. So I generally, I almost kind of feel bad whenever I stop to like feel good about all the work that I'm doing, because there's so much more work to be done. So, I don't know. I if I could just like rip that part of my brain or my personality out that looks back and just focus, totally brutally on the future and trying to get things done that are going to make even more impact, I think I'd be a much more efficient person for it.
I think you're absolutely correct there. So it's just think about the future and keep thinking about what else can be done to improve things and improve everybody's quality of living, and give people access to education. And education is such a fantastic transformation tool, right? And you just said here, be more effective. Can you when I sent my message to you on Twitter, I thought, well, this fellow is probably very busy. He'll probably never reply to this little guy who's trying to do a podcast here for a Brazilian audience, but you did, and you volunteer your time, and we're very thankful for that. And how do you handle your day? Because I'm assuming, just like me, there's piles of people contacting you all the time, and there's all the planning, all the collaboration work, and you're heavily involved in the community. I have been on Gitter, and I have seen you always on those groups. How do you handle your day? Do you sleep anytime, or how do you handle your workload in a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of systems in place to help me be efficient. But the main thing is I sleep at least 8 hours a day. Well, usually at least 7.5. I try to get 8 hours a day. Sleep is very important for being able to regulate cognition and being able to ensure that I can perform at a high level. So sleep also is very important in forming memories. And I myself am just trying to constantly learn. A couple of things that I do: I don't ever drink alcohol. I haven't drank alcohol in 5 years. I don't, do any other drugs. The only mood altering substance is caffeine, and I don't even drink that much caffeine. I just drink some tea, and I just try to sit down and throughout the day, every few minutes, I've got like, okay, what am I doing? What am I trying to accomplish here? Where am I? And I'm just trying to constantly evaluate my performance and think of how I can be more efficient. Couple of things that I do, like I only check my email like once every day or two, and I just go through all of it and respond to all of it, and then I move on. I only check Twitter like once every day or two, like my Twitter messages and stuff. I try to, like, I've got this kind of big loop that I go through, and then I spend a lot of the rest of the time taking care of my kids, and I've got 2 young children, taking them to the park, helping them get ready for naps, helping them eat lunch, stuff like that. I spend a lot of my time every night. I exercise. I just do a bunch of pull-ups and push-ups in my kitchen. I spend a lot of time playing music, and I spend a lot of time learning languages. I'm learning Spanish, and I'm trying to continue to expand my Chinese vocabulary. Learning as you already know, Marcelo, learning a second language is like a lifelong, venture. You're never going to know all the vocabulary. You're never going to know all the usage. You're still going to be learning things as you go. And for me, my philosophy is, if I can learn just a little bit, if I can just do like 20 minutes of Spanish a day, 20 minutes of Chinese, 30 minutes of playing music, then those skills will gradually improve over the years. And I'm 40 years old, which means if I'm lucky, I'll probably live another 40 years. And so over 40 years, I can become a very good Spanish speaker. I can become a very good Chinese speaker. I can become, a decent musician, those kinds of things. And it's the same thing with everything else. It's just trying to keep every day the exact same. I don't take a single day off. I work 7 days a week, but I only work like 4 to 6 hours a day. So it ends up being around 40 hours a week of work. So it's just taking smart, sustainable processes like that, and then having constant feedback. Like I always ask people, like how am I doing? Like, did I do anything suboptimal in this meeting? did I say something that was potentially offensive or silly during this call? Was I listening to people? Did I actually answer their question? Did I stay on topic? I'm constantly trying to evaluate my performance and figure out ways I can improve it. I think that's just me. I'm not saying everybody has to live that way. A lot of people want to take a weekend. They want to do other things. But for me, I found that this is best. I'm going to continue to tweak and improve this until the day I die. I'm sure there will be lots of suboptimalities in in my process, even when I die.
And the fact that you don't drink a lot of coffee, it's also very interesting. And I drink zero coffee, and people get surprised when they think of technology people that don't drink coffee. But it's and also the sleeping factor that you mentioned. It's such an important factor, right? So there's a misconception out there that people need to be, not sleeping and do work every night, and then so that's not good for you, and it's not going to make you more productive, and may make somebody else happy and rich, but it's probably not going to help your life. But Quincy, as we have been speaking here for almost an hour, I want to be respectful of your time as well. And a couple of things I usually ask at closer to the end of the conversation is, do you have any recommendations about books, music, or movies that you think our listeners could be interested in, knowing about?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest struggles I had when I was learning to code was not technical, it was motivational. And it would just be hard for me to sit down and actually code because it got scary. It would just be like, okay, I know I'm going to sit down and code, I'm going to get some work done, and then suddenly, boom, I'm going to hit an error message, and I'm not going to know what it means, and I'm going to start freaking out, right? And so learning to code became kind of scary. And I read a book that I thought was very, very useful. It's by a novelist who has written a bunch of novels. And the first 40 years of his life, he was a taxi driver. He was too scared to sit down and actually write books. But once he actually forced himself to do it and came up with this willpower to do it, he was able to win Pulitzer prizes and write best-selling novels. The book is called The War of Art. It's like Sun Tzu's the Chinese military technician, the Art of War, but it's The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I strongly recommend that book. It's a very short read, but it will kind of give you some context into why humans procrastinate and some strategies you can use to prevent yourself from procrastinating, and discipline yourself. At the end of the day, mental discipline and fortitude and being able to master your own body and your own mind, those are extremely valuable skills if you want to succeed. So I'd strongly recommend that book. And then a TV show that I think everybody should watch who's interested in tech, that I think is a great TV show that I think you all will probably like, is called Halt and Catch Fire. Halt and Catch Fire is an AMC show. It's based in America, in Texas, where I live, actually. It's based like right by where I live now. And it's set in the 1980s, and it's set at the beginning of kind of the like personal computer revolution, like with laptops and things like that. And it starts off following a kind of a hardware company that's building computers from chips and things like that, and then selling them. And it's got kind of that 1980s American business vibe. If you've watched like Wall Street and things like that, it's kind of got that vibe. But then halfway through the series, it shifts and they move to San Francisco, and then it follows the internet revolution of the 90s. So it's a really cool show, and it's very accurate from a technology perspective. Like, they had lots of programmers and computer scientists and historians involved in making it as historically accurate as possible. And it's really cool to feel like you're in the 1980s when everybody's really excited about reverse engineering IBM computers and things like that. And then in the 90s during the big initial .com rush. So I strongly recommend that show for everybody who's interested in programming and software engineering. Halt and Catch Fire.
Those are great recommendations. So thank you very much. Any music recommendation? Do you listen to music when you're doing your programming or not?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because we actually have a radio station called Code Radio. And if you go to coderadio.freecodecamp.org, it's music that a Los Angeles musician, producer named Lawrence Yo, he built this giant playlist of like 1,500 different songs that are they're good instrumental songs, and they're perfect for like coding. So that's what I listen to a lot of times. I'll just throw that on in the background while I code. That, I think a lot of people don't realize it exists. We're actually adding it to the navigation on FreeCodeCamp, so you can click Code Radio and it'll just open up a tab and start playing, and you can listen to some music while you code. But yeah, that'd be my musical recommendation.
Thank you. And Quince, since we're getting close here to the end, any final message that you'd like to leave to the Brazilian listeners that we have?
Yeah, to the Brazilian listeners and the Portuguese speaking diaspora around the world, I just want to wish you all a fun time. I hope you have a lot of fun coding. I hope you all are able to bond together. You share a language, and language is one of the most important things to pull people together. If you look at the Arab world, it's not defined by religion or culture. Really, it's defined by the language. Who speaks Arabic and who doesn't? And that's something that's very important. And I'm hopeful that Brazil, especially, and the rest of the Portuguese speaking world will continue to rise. And we're very excited. One of the tools. Okay, this is cool. So we use chat. I'm going to go ahead and tell you about this. No, we're not publicizing this, but because the creator of Rocket Chat is a Brazilian, it's a very cool kind of Slack alternative that's self-hosted. It's called Rocket Chat. And I talked to him, and he's super, super chill guy. And so a lot of their team is based in Brazil. And so we adopted that. We got off of Discord, we got off of Slack and all those tools. And now we still technically have a Discord, but we're moving everything over to chat.freecodecamp.org. And that's our Rocket Chat server. So I am hopeful. I think it's, even as an American, I think it's embarrassing that so much of technology is focused in just this one part of California. And I want to see tech become truly global and have lots of large companies all around the world, and not just have America dominating everything. I don't think it's healthy long term for tech to be a Silicon Valley phenomenon. And so I'm hopeful that lots of great companies will come out of Brazil, and hopefully some big nonprofits as well. So I encourage you all to keep working toward that, and know that you have my full support, and that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that all the technology insight and know-how that's in Silicon Valley, that we take that and we distribute that as widely as we can, so that more communities can have big employers, and more companies can kind of have these crown jewels of their just like Canada. Of course, I know you're up in Canada. Shopify is really amazing what they've done. We'd love to see more companies like that outside of the US that are doing well as well.
Again, I just want to take a minute here to thank you. So you spent an hour of your day, and it's absolutely fantastic, very inspiring. And I learned a lot from our conversation here today. So I just want to wish you tons of success, and keep helping others, and keep, like you said at the conversation here, there's piles of people that need help, right? So, and that's absolutely fantastic what you have been doing. And so thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge, and everything that you're doing is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Marcelo, for having me.
Cheers. Chegamos ao final de mais um episódio. Agradeço a todos a atenção, e o nosso site é OsProgramadores.com. Participem e até o próximo episódio. Um bom dia para todos.